Hey folks, I hope you're having a great day. This week has been a very busy week for me, so I've just got a quick topic that about a question that I get not infrequently. People have asked me this quite a bit, and I thought we'd just take a few minutes and talk about it. So in my last video, Susanne Harvey asked a question. Well, she kind of had a two-parter question. And the first part was comparing the fluval flex, or the fluval edge, to the fluval flora, which is a video all in itself. And the second part was really what kind of triggered some thoughts, and that was, when do I add fish to a new planted tank? And before I go any further, I'd like to say a big thank you to my past, present, and future Patreon subscribers. You folks have done so much to help this channel and to help me grow, and I really appreciate it. Thank you. Now, before I discuss anything, the core knowledge of how to keep an aquarium is really the nitrogen cycle. And once you understand that, a lot of these other things make more sense. That's its own subject. There'll be a link at the end of this video for my take on it, but there are literally hundreds of videos about this on the internet, and it's one of those things that, as a beginner, that's really where you should start. It's sort of a fascinating question because there's a bunch of different schools of thought on that, and I've shared a lot of that alongside building the tanks, but I thought maybe it'd be interesting to do a separate kind of thought session about that specific subject. All right, so let's break this question down. So it's a planted tank, it's a new planted tank, but when do fish go in? Well, there's a bunch of different ways to set up a planted tank. I've done a lot of them on this channel, but basically when I do them, it ends up being kind of one or two ways. Either you've got reactive substrate, those are those aqua soils and that sort of thing, and then you've got your non-reactive substrate, so that's fluorite and sand or something along those lines. Eco-complete, I think, falls in there. Gravel falls in there. More of the substrates lean towards this non-reactive type than the reactive type, but there are different considerations. So your soil substrates are going to go through a period of high ammonia. As soon as you add water to that tank and you fill it up, it releases a lot of ammonia into the water. Now you can kind of use this to sort of help your nitrogen cycle along. I was real skeptical of this, but a bunch of people have told me that it's perfectly fine to do this. But you could go ahead and add your beneficial bacteria and stuff like that and sort of achieve a fishless cycle. I really love using the soil-based substrates. There's a spike in ammonia, but I usually add a little beneficial bacteria, the bottled beneficial bacterias. I think I've tried dozens of different kinds of those. I don't have a microscope or anything or the ability and knowledge enough to go in there and determine how effective those individual enzymes were, the enzymes in a bottle. First couple of weeks, if I can, I like to take water from another tank and then add it. So my water changes are really changing water from one tank into, say, a new tank. And I do as much of that as possible. Sometimes I'll mix it a little bit, like the new dirted tank that I've been working on. I've been mixing in, it's about 20% new water, and the rest of the 70% of the water change is going to be water from another tank if I can. I'll just siphon into a bucket and add it that way. And the things that the bacteria eat are almost entirely in the water column. So those help a lot with a fishless cycle. So what you use for substrate might sort of inform your decision on how soon you add fish. The other thing to consider too is that if you're starting from scratch and you have no aquariums, you have nothing to steal from, because that bacteria lives on the top of all these other things. If you can steal from other aquariums, like you got a rock from here, a plant from here, maybe even a small amount of the substrate from another tank, you can add that into your aquarium and kind of get things going a little bit faster. A lot of people that ask me this sort of thing don't have another tank though. It's one of their first tanks, or maybe their first or second tank, and they're still kind of getting established and they don't have a bunch of tanks around to steal things from. And just to try it, I've done it a few times too, where you just kind of start fresh. You're not really adding a lot from other tanks. You can do it, but you need to remember to be very patient. How much you plant early on can also determine how long it takes for that tank to really become suitable for another fish. It's generally recommended to plant just as heavily as possible when you initially put it in there. And you need to consider too that plants have sort of a transition period, even if they're going from underwater in one tank to underwater in your tank. There's a little bit of a transition period where it gets used to the type of light, the temperature, and even the way the substrate's set up. All those things the plant has to adjust, and it has a little bit of a dormancy period where it just kind of sits there and then it eventually wakes up and starts to grow again. So my big #1 tip for when to add fish to a planted tank is when the plants start to grow. If you can wait that long, and sometimes it's just too long, I understand, and you're going to maybe stick one fish in there or something else. If you get a master's test or any other quality water test, you test for the ammonia and you test for the nitrates. If you see ammonia at all, it's probably not a good idea to put a fish in there. If you see nitrates start to pop up and the ammonia is at 0, then it's starting to kind of move on through the cycle. And like I said, the cycle is a whole nother subject. So you can do water tests and stuff to determine this, but the thing is, plants grow most optimally when that cycle has kind of started to finish, when there's not an overabundance of ammonia, when there's not an overabundance of nitrates. That's when the plants kind of start to acclimate and become viable as part of your filter. If you add fish before the plants have really started to kind of recover and start to grow, you're adding more nutrients into the water, and will probably bring on algae, which will definitely take advantage of the fact that your plants aren't settled in yet. A huge and understandable point of frustration with people that have just gotten into planted tanks is the fact that algae is always going to be there to some degree. The closer to balanced you get, the closer to the just amount of nutrients that go in or the ones that the plants take up, if you can get into that balance, you'll have almost no algae to deal with. But usually, almost always, I would say 99.9% of the time, at some point in that planted tank's life, you're going to have an algae issue that you have to deal with. I like to mitigate that by letting the plants grow on their own as much as possible. So I clean the tank, I take care of it just like I would if it had a fish in it. You know, changing some water out every so often, bringing the water in from other tanks and stuff. And I just try to maintain it. And usually it'll be 2 or 3 weeks of just kind of keeping it like that. And then I'll start to notice some plants will grow. And when I get comfortable that like, okay, that's growing and that's growing and that's growing, when I feel like it's time, then I'll start adding fish and dealing with that. Again, adding fish slowly, watching the water quality as I go along, watching the plants, watching to see if I'm getting too far ahead of myself, if algae is like suddenly a big issue in there, maybe I pull back a little bit, or go up on my water changes. As I add fish, I always add beneficial bacteria in with it, even if the tank seems to be completely cycled, just to help it along, just kind of give it that boost. A lot of this advice is specifically for a planted tank. There are plenty of people that do bare bottom tanks with sponge filters. With one of those, you can fill up your aquarium. You can throw a seasoned sponge filter from another aquarium in there, and your tank is cycled. That's kind of the way it goes. The only other consideration, like in the first couple of hours and days after you fill up an aquarium, it's still got a mixture of gases that develop inside of the water systems, the municipal water systems and stuff. Like you're going to have you'll see bubbles clinging to your glass and stuff like that. All of that stuff's got to work its way out of the water. It's in small amounts, it's not really harmful to anything, but in larger amounts, it's probably not a great idea. That's why it's never a good idea to go home, fill up your aquarium, and throw a fish in there. It's if you're starting completely from scratch, that's just not the way to go. And there you go. I hope you found that useful. There's a lot of schools of thought on this, and I'd be curious to know your opinion. So if you got a strong opinion on this particular subject, feel free to leave it in the comments down below. I'll see you there. And that's all I got for you this week. Follow your bliss, keep a clean tank, and I'll see you soon. If you'd like to know my take on the nitrogen cycle, you can click right up here. If you'd like to see what YouTube has prepared for you, You can look right down here. Please subscribe. I'm almost to 50,000 and I'd like to see you again. Bye-bye.